would like to now introduce Luke. And Luke's claim to fame is he is married to our Chelsea. So, so come on up.
It's my honor to introduce the director of the Traumatic Brain Injury Recovery Association. She's been working for many years. She's actually the only nonprofit specifically focusing on traumatic brain injury and fighting for the rights of people who have gone through that to help them regain back their lives. So it's my honor to introduce Ms. Arlene Atherton.
So first of all, brain injury can happen to anyone. This is what has made this a national crisis. It only has an incident rate of about 3 million people a year, which is still a lot of people, but that's 2% of the population. And so they've gotten very good about making sure everyone's got good ER care and they're able to save our lives. So that is positive. The problem is it's so thin in treatment with neuropsychs and neurology, who are the domain for brain injury, that there are only a few of those that are spread around and they're in the teaching hospitals. So it's very hard to get care after you have your brain injury. And of course, brain injury, the most common is motor vehicle accidents. Anybody can be in that. Sports injuries, we've all heard about the NFL concussion case. There's skiing accidents and basketball slipping on the court. Certainly soccer had injuries there. And also falls, just simple falls. So it's not something that's genetic. It's not related to your age. It happens to children. It happens to kids in sports in high school. And it can happen to your grandmother, it can happen to you. So everyone has to know about it. Brain injury survivors have really only been around a short time, which is where they're having trouble grappling with what to do with us. It was the Iraq War in around the early 2000s, especially after the invasion from 9/11, which I was the first responder for. And you might remember Bob Woodward was an ABC News correspondent, and he was hit by an IED. His life was saved by a military hospital in Germany, where the military pioneered the surgeries that was necessary to save lives. Before that, you just died. So we live now. Our problem is, like when I went to see my own neuropsych doctor, I said, okay, so what do I do now? How do I get better? They answered, we don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I said, you're the doctor. They said, we're studying you. And in about 20 years, we'll release a protocol and we'll tell people what to do. So what ends up happening to you is you wake up in the ER room. They're checking to make sure all your physical functions are okay, that you can walk, you can talk, you can speak, you've got your speech centers, you're able to pronounce words, and they want to make sure all those things are intact. And then you start getting the information about what's going to happen to you now that you have a brain injury. The room has been darkened because you're photosensitive. You have trouble dealing with loud noises. And so sound is an issue for you. So they keep you in a darkened room and they keep it in places that are quiet. This is not just in the hospital. This can go on for the next 2 years for you, or some people even longer. So they find navigating with brain injury very difficult. So what's happening in your brain is that you really had a ripping, a tearing, and a shearing of the brain tissue itself. So that means brain cells are plain gone. And so whatever domain that they were controlling is not available to you. And so what happens to you is you lose certain kinds of functions, and every brain injury is different. The good news is that God made neuroplasticity. Brain injury is the only disability, the only one, and especially the only one in brain injuries that you can recover from. So what will happen is the brain will create new neurons and knit a neural network around the injured area and take over those former functions. So you can recover. The bad news is the healing horizon for that is 5 to 15 years. So you have to live with this deficit for a long time before you get back to your what you remember to be as yourself. Okay, this is an example of brain injury behavior. So, one of the things that happens to you is everyone who's injured has an impact to what's called the limbic system. This is the system that controls your emotions. It's the oldest part of the brain, it's amphibian, and it covers the whole brain. It sits on the top of your head and covers the sides, the front, and the back, and it's a network, and it controls all the other functions in the brain. So you lose the ability to filter stimuli. So this is why you're sound sensitive. People crying, people making noise. It's very common that even if you're on the street, that you'll duck into a building and go into a bank where it's quiet and sit there for a while and calm down because you can't take all the noise that's around you. One of the things that happens to you is that your response is you get frustrated very easily. You have the emotions of a child. So just like a toddler that will cry 1 minute and then you show them a little pony and then they quit. That's what happens to you with a brain injury. So you don't keep your anger, but you get frustrated easily and you can go to 10 right away and start screaming and say, don't do this to me. And what's hard for the public to understand is that this is coming from an adult. We've learned to accept this from our children and wait for them to grow up. And the reality is the brain injured person has to grow up again and learn social response and wait for that brain limbic system to get healed before they can control their emotions. So we're trying to teach the general public to accept their behavior and not call security and not call the police and say, hey, they're making trouble over here, get rid of them. And learn to tolerate them in society. That's the limbic system that we're talking about. It covers the whole brain. And you can see that from the pointers on there, it connects to all the other functional sections of your brain. So it affects all the areas of your behavior. Okay, here's our motto. You got a TBI, you're a terrific, beautiful individual. So we want to know that just because you have a TBI doesn't mean that you've lost yourself and you can't contribute to society. One of our other problems is the Congress put us in the intellectual disability category of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I said, so why did you do that? Because the intellectual disability category is for the developmentally disabled or the mentally retarded. I said, that means when people hear we're intellectually disabled, they think we're stupid, we can't do things, that we need a co-signer, that we can't comprehend things, because that's what happens to people who are disabled from birth. We're all going to get better, and they won't hire us because they think we can't comprehend the job. So we're campaigning to get cognitive disability instead of intellectual disability. One of the real factors is an overwhelming fatigue. What happens is the brain is so badly damaged that the body is intelligent and shuts down everything so it can start healing that brain tissue. You will sleep 16 hours a day for the first year. You can't work. You're too busy just sleeping, eating dinner, and watching a little TV and going back to bed. So you're really out of it. This can continue. This fatigue will happen for up to 10 years at various degrees. I had my brain injury 12 years ago, and I still need 12 hours of sleep. If I get less than that, I can tell that I'm losing some of my functions. I'm making mistakes. I'm mixing things up. So fatigue is a real part. You have to have that sleep for the brain to be able to operate. One of the problems in being in public with a brain injury is that fatigue will overcome you in a second, and you have to lay down immediately. And you will sit down on the floor of a shop or a restaurant, and you say, look, I got to rest. And they won't understand what you're doing there. And pretty soon the manager comes out and says, you got to quit that. You're going to shop, you can shop here, but otherwise go outside. Well, you can't go outside. So this will overcome you, and it will rapidly cause police to be called who don't know what to do with you either. And so we're trying to teach fatigue is not a reason to be arrested, that you have a disability and that you have to be able to deal with that. And it's not something that's of will, it will overcome you, and you just have to rest immediately. This is an example of what happens to people that are overstimulated. They can't filter the information that's going on. One of the problems we're having as being brain injured is we are confused by the police as being mentally ill. So they think that because we're having trouble with the social situation, or we're maybe confused, or we take a long time to make a decision, this is all the brain processing slow because it can't get through the normal neural network and it's going in circles around trying to make the decision. So we are being misunderstood and oftentimes taken from the street straight to an ER room who says, "Oh, we know what's wrong with you. You have disorganized thinking. You have psychosis. And so therefore you're going to have to stay here." And they lock you up. So we're fighting that. So this is a campaign we're running right now. We're doing an initiative to re-educate the police department and the law enforcement and first responders. President Biden passed a law in 2022 requiring a national training of safety officers about TBI and PTSD. So many people have lost their lives to getting arrested, put in jail, and put in mental hospitals that Congress finally made a law and says we have to stop that. We have to learn to recognize that. TBIRA has partnered with FAAC, which is the oldest military simulation training in the United States. They also do simulations for law enforcement. And I said, look, you don't have anything on TBI. You've got the crisis intervention, but that's someone who's got a mental illness and has become hostile. That's not our problem. And we're getting frustrated and we're raising our voice, but that doesn't mean we're aggressive or that you should label us violent and whisk us off because we're a risk to the public safety. So we're doing a campaign. In fact, we have a conference for the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Executives next week that we're going to be exhibiting at. So we are campaigning to actually change the standard of care. Who should be taking care of us? We are challenging the mental health industry, which is a big job. And so the mental health industry is dominated by psychiatry. It's about controlling behavior. And it says that if you're not behaving correctly, look, we'll give you this medication. It'll change the chemistry of your brain and you'll behave like a normal person. We're against that because, first of all, our behavior is normal for someone who's disabled with a brain injury. Second, we have neuroplasticity, which means that the brain is healing itself. And if you introduce a drug or a pharmaceutical, it stops that neuroplasticity process. And so you stop us from getting better. We don't want to have your psych drugs. We want to be taken care of by the domain of neurology, which is only 200 years old, where psychiatry has happened before the 3rd century BC. So this is a whole new idea that we're shifting in our medical health system, is to get brain injured people treated by neuropsychs. We're even trying to require that at mental health hearings that we have a neuropsych available by telehealth to do the interview of the person before they're committed into a mental hospital, because a brain injured person is not mentally ill. So this gives you the difference in the two of them. On the left, we have brain scans. A neurologist is going to do tests to really look at the functioning of your brain and see what part of it's working and what part is not, and at what level is it working. You're graded at the level of achievement, just like a child is that's reading at the level of 8th grade or high school. And so you're able to see where your deficits are. On the right, we have the approach from psychiatry, which is really all about giving you a pill and trying to make you change your behavior, and we're against that. Also difficult for us because we've only been around since 2003. with the saving of our lives, there's no case law for TBI. So one of our problems is, even though if you're mentally ill, you can get housing that's available to the disabled. You can get the low income assistance for your energy assistance. You can get accommodations. But if you have a TBI and you go to them, you say, hey, look, I need a computer, I need assisted technology. They go, I'm sorry. But TBI is not one of our criterias. Our criteria is only for the developmentally disabled who are intellectual disabled. So we haven't graduated with any of these federal protections into the state or the local area. So we are relying on the Americans with Disabilities Act, which does say that we're covered as a legitimate disability that's protected. We're taking the first step forward to try and deal with this act and the law enforcement. We've created the first ever registry of traumatic brain injured persons in the United States. We'll be promoting this at our launch in July of this year. So our goal is to have people sign up as members on our site. They get a free membership. They get a free enrollment in this registry. Their enrollment card is going to go give them a membership card that goes to their smartphone. The smartphone has a QR code that can be scanned by the police on their own cell phones, and they can get in our database and have verified that they're a member and that they've registered before they were stopped. And they can now say to them, look, don't arrest me. I've got a protected disability. I'm not mentally ill. Right now, we have a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the only one that exists, challenging this issue of what kind of medical care you should have. Too often, we have hundreds of thousands of brain injured people who have been locked up into mental hospitals. It's being called brain injury for the poor, that if you can't afford to have your own private care, you end up being locked up and institutionalized like they used to do the mentally ill throughout our history until we had the Olmstead Act in 1999, which said you could live in the community. So this case is going before the Supreme Court, and I'm actually authoring it. I couldn't find any lawyer that would challenge the mental health industry. They told me that I would lose against the hospital. I said, watch me. And and I said, I know what I'm doing. I didn't lose my IQ. I just got a brain injury. So it's a medical malpractice case. We're arguing for the standard of care to be neurology. We want a doctor to lose their license if they give you a recommendation that you have to go to the mental hospital, or the hospital to lose their federal funding of Medicaid if they send brain injured persons to the mental hospital. And we want to make sure that people get the adequate care that they belong to for their brain injured case. So thank you. That pretty much wraps up. So we believe in the regeneration. We want to protect intellect because you still keep your memory, you still keep your intelligence, you still keep your long-term experiences. In fact, when I was brain injured and I was talking to my friends, they said, well, you sound you've got this and this and this. What's wrong with you? I said, I got no RAM. I don't have working memory. So what happens to you is your intelligence is locked inside you and you can't process it enough because your brain is damaged, but you know what's right and what's supposed to be happening, but you can't make it happen. So we want to give brain injured people a chance at a second life, help them regain their profession, get back into the community, be productive again, and not suffer being sitting at home like everyone's telling them that their life is over. Thank you.
We have time we have time for 2 short questions.
Thank you for talking to us, giving your experience, a personal experience, as well as what you learn through this experience you have. However, I wanted to be sure we do not get any confusion with a psychiatric problem and neurological problem. Both of them create symptoms that overlap one with another. And also, psychiatric problem can come from traumatic emotional experience. Both of them, emotion as well as a neurological defect from traumatic injury, and psychology are always in the brain. So when the person become to be in a danger with the behavior, need a psychiatric hospitalization. And need
Well,
a
we
treatment.
disagree because what we end up happening is when you go to the psychiatry and you're in the mental illness community, they'll agree with you. Okay, we have the DMS-5 and we agree you have a brain injury, but we are saying that you have a mental illness that's secondary to that, and we're going to give you these drugs. We're opposing that because it stops our neuroplasticity, and we're developing this campaign that says you must accept our behavior, not try and control it with drugs. And there are other mechanisms. And in fact, in the VA hospitals, they use something called CRATER, CRATER, which is a group therapy program that's cognitive, that deals with traumatic incidences and stress. And it helps them deal with how to manage their response to these triggers. But the problem with your brain injury is you do not have this emotional control. You cannot do it. And so we're saying you have to accept us.
This is a certificate for the tree that's going to be planted in your name, and there will be GPS coordinates to tell you where the tree is. You can go sit under the tree and have lunch one day.
I think that's great.
Thank you.